So, where do you want to start?
Okay. Do you want to go first or shall I?
Um, it's up to you. I don't mind really.
Okay, I'll go first. Just briefly, I'm in favor of capitalism, the market economy, private property. I think that's the best
Okay.
system. Yeah. How about you?
So, I'm in favor of socialism, but I think it's important that I outline what I mean by that because lots of people have different opinions of what the term socialism means. So, what I mean is, um, rather than private ownership over the means of production, some form of social ownership over the means of production. And for me, I think the ideal system would be a market-based socialist system. So we still accept markets, whilst, well, more accurately, a mixed market. So you have markets which would operate under worker cooperatives, and then you also have some state-run industries, whether that be, especially whether natural monopolies, for example, utilities, trains, other forms of transport, etc. Um, I think it's also important to say that when I envision socialism, it does not, I do not mean the kind of socialism or what people describe as the Marxist Leninist states of the likes of USSR, Maoist China, etc. Um, First of all, I wouldn't even consider them socialists, and I don't think even Marx would consider them socialist, but that's a whole other discussion. But regardless, I'm not such a fan of command-based economies to that extent, and I also am profoundly in favor of democracy, and I feel that socialism is the best way to achieve and maximize people's freedom, which I don't think these countries did or had any intention in doing. So,
So you would still have money in your system,
yes.
and these worker cooperatives, would they be independent or would they be sort of organized by a central organization?
Independent.
So they would just decide what to produce, how much to produce on their own, sort of thing. Maybe in
Well, I
consultation
mean,
with the
you
workers or
would you
whatever.
would
They would have a
still have,
council.
yeah, you'd still have government regulations as you do today. You'd still have taxation, etc. But
So the government would
outside
enforce
of those,
like labor standards or whatever. They would enforce safety regulations.
um, I don't think there would be a need to do that, since they would sort of regulate themselves to a large degree. But I feel there may still be cases where you might need regulation, for example, like what kind of product you produce to make sure like a toaster is not an explosive device, just basic kind of regulations to ensure the safety of consumers, not just the producers.
Right. So you like sort of the Mondragon style of production.
Well, Mondragon recently has been what do you call it? Outsourcing a lot of its production, and those outsourced elements are not incorporated in the work cooperative. But so I have an issue with that. But yeah, I mean, as a whole, it is a worker cooperative. So yes.
Now, how would you go about transitioning from the capitalist society we have today towards this socialist model? Um, like you, if you were to socialize a single company, you could pay off the owners or whatever. But if you're doing the entire economy, that's not viable, right? You would have to basically seize their property.
Uh, correct. Yes. So I would. if I were in power, and of course, like the exact details of this are kind of hard to determine. Um, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, any company above a certain number of employees, say like 50 employees, would immediately or would have a vote internally within the company, and if they vote to become a worker cooperative, they would become a worker cooperative, and it'd be a legal change. The state would stop enforcing the right of a capitalist within that institution, and instead the state would enforce the rights of the workers to own that institution.
So would there be
And
consumers in
then
this society?
would there be what, sorry?
Consumers.
Consumers?
Yeah, people buying stuff, at stores. I guess. I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah,
trying to
yeah.
just trying to figure out how
Yeah,
it
of
all
course.
works, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, it would be exactly the same. There'd be businesses producing and selling products, except the internal working of those businesses, rather than a capitalist owning the means of production, it would be the workers collectively owning the means of production. And in smaller companies, they may decide to have like a more direct democracy system where they sit around a table and they decide, okay, in our cafe, let's say, what are we doing wrong? What do we need to improve? How do we want to manage profits at the end of the month? But that doesn't seem very feasible for larger institutions, larger collections of people. So they may want to elect managers or a board of directors, and then those board of directors make the decisions for the company. Yeah.
right. Um, so what about what about the seizing of the property? Isn't that theft? How do you justify that seizing of the factories or whatever?
Theft, that's an interesting term. Um, I think, well, first of all, under our current economic system, a proportion of the work people do is extracted from workers in some form of surplus value. Now, I'm not endorsing Marxian sense of surplus value, which would be the labor theory of value, but clearly, from a logical perspective, if you're an employer, you would not hire someone unless the economic returns of hiring that person would be greater than the amount you pay them. Okay. And clearly, even in companies where the capitalists, whom often did not start the business, but rather just invested in the business in terms of shares in the company, etc., those capitalists do no labor within that. They offer nothing other than the capital, right? And therefore, they are entirely unnecessary because we could exist in a system whereby that capital was owned directly by the workers. Um, so all profits that they make thereafter are essentially taken from workers because they are unnecessary. We could operate under a different system where that would not be the case.
But if
Okay, so
if
that's.
a corporation offers a worker a wage, and the worker agrees to work for
Mhm.
that wage, how is that theft when it's a voluntary interaction?
Um, how we define voluntary and involuntary is rather subjective, in my opinion. But even if we assume, so okay, so first of all, in most capitalist societies, you refuse to work and you continue to refuse to work within a capitalist institution, then you will face destitution, you will face poverty. So it's not a real choice. If you have to choose between starvation and working for a capitalist, that's not really a voluntary choice. However, one could assume that you would live in a system whereby there was like a UBI, for example, and a strong welfare state. And yes, you could say it is voluntary to work. However, that doesn't justify the expropriation, in my opinion, because all humans, to some degree, want to work. It's an intrinsic part of being human, wanting to um, find value and purpose. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect people to basically say, um, okay, so to basically say, okay, then don't work. If you're not happy with it, just don't. Okay? Because whilst it's still extractive, the workers may individually still prefer to at least for their labor, even if some of the work they do is extracted by the capitalist. You get what I mean?
But
Say like
I have a question
10,
though. But
and
isn't that
yeah.
the same situation in your society? If there's somebody that doesn't want to work, aren't they going to starve to death as well?
Well, first of all, I would be in favor of like a UBI or some sort of minimum floor to ensure that everyone is cared for, regardless of whether or not they have a job.
So a tax on workers to fund a universal basic
Yes.
income. But isn't that
Yes.
also expropriating the surplus value from the worker?
Taxes, yeah, you could say that. Taxes are expropriation, but I think the difference is it's a justifiable form of expropriation, especially in the case of a UBI, because the UBI is making work voluntary. It's changing it from involuntary to voluntary,
But I would say it's
which
different in
itself
another
reduces.
form. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Or by changing work from being involuntary to voluntary, it inherently work less exploitative. Right? It makes the choice less exploitative. I agree with you. Taxes in themselves, you could call it exploitative. But if overall in a society it reduces exploitation, that is justifiable from a utilitarian point of view.
I would argue that
Not only that,
aside from being exploitative, you can argue that taxation is also criminal because it involves the use of coercion as a means of obtaining revenue, which is really the same thing that a robber does.
I have issue with you saying that it's criminal because criminal is itself a legal term. So you're making a moral statement, which is, I believe it is wrong to tax. Okay. And you are then comparing that to an analogy of someone stealing your money.
But legally,
I
it's illegal to threaten somebody with violence in order to get their money. That's a crime.
Yeah, I understand.
Extortion.
I understand the analogy you make. It's not. I just have an issue with the terminology you used. The analogy makes sense, sure. I think, yeah, sure, you can call it theft, or you can make that comparison if you like. But it's the cool kind of theft, you know?
There's also a moral
Justified.
hazard inherent with taxation in that because the money is obtained involuntarily, then you don't really have any control on what it's spent on. That's why governments can spend money on things like blowing up innocent brown people in the third world that nobody in their right mind would voluntarily fund, but because they have this
Mhm.
power, they can go and do that, and that can benefit them, politically, even though it's a savage and unjustifiable act.
Difference between the extraction from a state through taxes theory, um, compared to extraction from capitalists. Capitalists can use that money however they wish, with no sort of repercussions electorally, democratically from the vast majority of people. States, on the other hand, are responsible to some degree to the interests of workers, to what they desire.
What's your view on private
Therefore, it is
property?
more. Sorry?
What's your view on private property?
Would I? Sorry, it seems like you cut out sometimes. Would I what something with private property?
Yeah, what's your view on private property? Let me turn up my mic
Or
here.
what's my view on private property? Okay. Um, well, it's an interesting phrasing. What's my view in private property? I believe that the means of production being owned by a few in society inherently leads to unfavorable power dynamics, which allow for the extraction from the vast majority of people, which lead to undemocratic systems, um, and morally unjustifiable power differentials between people. Um, I would also, however, I have no issue with people owning like their own house if they want to, you know,
So you
so
believe in
long as they're not.
personal property but not private property?
Yes, exactly. If you want to make that distinction, then yeah, personal property is fine, things that you want to own. I would also say, and this, you know, many socialists would probably say I'm not socialist because I believe this, but they can say whatever they want. I would say that a very small company like a family-owned restaurant or something like that, there's just a few employees. I have no issue with that, you know, because I feel there is a value in people independently wanting to start their own enterprises and having a dream and realizing that dream. I have no issue with that, and I feel that within small enough organizations, there's enough social pressure in terms of the workers and the capitalists getting to know each other on a, you know, in a close manner, having a relationship with each other, which diminishes the worst forms of exploitation and
Are you
which
familiar with
uses
the ranters and the diggers?
vaguely, but not really. No.
Okay, so they were early Christian millennial communists that
Hmm.
existed during the English Civil War. Um, so have there been any? I understand you disavow the Soviet Union and
Yeah.
China. You consider that, I assume, state capitalism. Have there been any socialist societies throughout history?
Have there been any socialist societies?
Yeah.
Um, there have been some societies that I would say were socialist, but they're not the kind of socialism that I would desire. They're quite different. So, as within capitalist societies, I'm sure if I were to ask you, do you support like Sudan or um, dictatorial or Cuba under the dictatorship of Tito? Was it Tito?
But Baptiste or
Um,
something? But Tito was
yeah, that's
Tito
Batista. That's
was
it.
where was Tito? I want to say Hungary
Yeah,
or
no, Tito's. Oh, sorry. Yeah, yeah. I confused them in my head. So Batista.
Batista. Yeah.
Sounds similar. Yeah, yeah. So I'm sure if I were to ask you
Yugoslavia
if
maybe.
you
Where
would
was
agree
Tito?
with that system. Sorry?
Yeah, he was Yugoslavian. Tito was sorry.
Right. Okay. Okay. So
Yeah,
I'm sure if I were to ask you, do you support those societies? You would say, no, I don't, even though those societies would be considered capitalist.
yeah. Well, I mean, I certainly don't support the Soviet Union. Which you consider capitalist.
Right. There you go. But you probably would not consider that capitalist. I was just trying to make an example of something that you would consider capitalist, yet you would also not agree with.
Right,
Probably
right.
there are societies which I would consider somewhat socialist, because again, I don't think capitalism and socialism are like black and white terms. I think there is a somewhat of a sliding scale. For example, I would say Cuba is somewhat socialist because to some degree there is a democratic state, but then in another degree it's highly undemocratic. So, like, um, to be honest, I haven't looked into it enough to really say whether I would consider a country like Cuba socialist or not. For me, it very much depends on how democratic their institutions are. If there is genuinely um, worker participation and accountability for the way that the state is run, then I think you can make an argument that it's somewhat socialist. But it's not got rid of the elements of capitalism which I particularly dislike, and it's not the kind of socialism that I would want.
Yeah, I don't think anybody advocates for political repression, which occurs in Cuba, and just economically, they haven't had a great record. You might attribute some of that to the embargo,
The
which no doubt didn't
Yeah,
help. But
I would consider a lot of that due to the embargo, but again, I'm not in favor of command economies either, so I don't really have skin in the game to
right, right.
kind of.
So do you think that there's something there because there have been no socialist societies? Socialism has been an ideology for a couple hundred years now. Maybe it's not possible.
I mean, there have been ideologies for a long time that have not necessarily been implemented. That doesn't mean that those ideologies have no value. It just means those in power have no interest in it,
But doesn't
you
private
know?
ownership of property have a pretty good track record in terms of, all the wealthiest countries in the world really embrace that principle?
Sure, in monetary terms, capitalism has massively increased productivity, etc. However, I would not consider these a success because whilst they have increased productivity, etc., they have also massively exploited the world's resources, um, which has hurtled us closer and closer towards irreversible climate change.
So you think
At
we
the
should
same
slow down
time,
on the exploitation of resources?
most definitely, yes.
See, I have an
Um,
issue with conservation of resources because, um, like historically, whenever, since prehistory, man has as a species has gotten wealthier and wealthier as time goes on. So I think that trend is going to continue. So why should we conserve resources for a future generation to use when they're going to be wealthier than us anyway?
the problem is climate change. Climate change and the destruction of natural habitats, which the problem is the speed in which this climate change is occurring and at which habitats are changing.
That speed being
Nature can't
about
keep
what
up with.
1.5 degrees over 150 years.
Yeah, which doesn't seem like much, but the consequences will be disastrous.
Will it though? I mean, if the first 1.5 degrees hasn't really done
Well,
anything,
this this is not even opinion. This is just empirical fact. Like the sea levels rising will cost billions in terms of infrastructure. Um, the increase in temperatures will be felt much more greatly closer to the equator, will lead to more outbreaks of famine, will lead to higher likelihood of infectious diseases like malaria.
and yet if you look at the
Um,
NASA temperature data, so far warming has been mostly focused in cold, arid regions like the North Pole, like Canada and Russia. A lot of the places on the equator, they're already maxed out in their global warming because of the water vapor, which is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. They're already reflecting 100% of that light back. It can't go any higher.
That may be the case. What I'm saying is that the negative effects will be most felt by those at the equator, and I believe there are empirical studies that show this.
Well, I don't think empirical
I'd
studies can
have,
predict the future. You can
I don't
make
have those studies, so I can't really provide it to you right now.
no. I'm
But
just saying the future is unknown. You
from
can't state something with a fact that the future is going to be, something. We can make predictions.
uh-huh. Even the IPCC, which takes all of the top scientists when it comes to climate change from around the world and brings them into one panel to try and discuss climate change, they have said that we need a complete change in the way that our economy works and fundamental um, rapid changes in the way that we utilize resources in order to meet our climate commitment goals, and that if we don't reach those goals, the consequences will be disastrous for humanity and for nature. So,
I
you
mean,
know,
I believe in global warming. I think it's a real thing. As I said, we've had about 1.5 degrees Celsius since industrialization. Climate is a chaotic system. Uh,
we haven't reached 1.5 just yet.
right, we're 1.4 or whatever.
Mhm.
But
It's
uh,
looking pretty light.
but I don't
We
think it's
the
a
climate.
catastrophic threat to the human race. We're very adaptable. If you look at deaths from climate disasters over the last 100 years, they've gone down tremendously. Cold kills 10 times as many people as heat does every year, and a lot of nations like Canada and Russia stand to benefit from global warming. I think it's a little myopic to say that it's simply going to be a negative thing. If the climate can change for the worse, it can change for the better as well.
I think the evidence would disagree with you. I think the problem is more to do with the rate at which it's changing. Of course, the climate has changed throughout human history. Like, you can go back to the Ice Age, and the temperature globally was very different. The
Which
point
ice
is the
age?
rate of change. Something, yeah, the rate of change is something that we will have to rapidly adapt to, and which nature will not be able to rapidly adapt to.
We're actually in
Um,
an ice age at the moment.
well,
An ice age refers to
okay,
whether or not there's glaciers existing.
so let me find some evidence on this, because otherwise I'm just,
Sure, yeah.
there's not much point talking about it unless I can provide some facts. But um, uh, well, I mean, what do you have to say on the reduction in food production, for example, that is predicted to happen through climate change?
I mean, the Earth has already experienced substantial global greening because of the CO2.
But the likelihood of droughts and extreme weather events would increase drastically. There are many parts of the world that would no longer be agriculturally viable for food production.
I mean, the number of
I mean,
hurricanes is actually going down. They're getting a little stronger. Uh, I just don't see it as a catastrophic threat to the human race. We can adapt, you
I
know.
don't think there's really much. I don't think there's much point if we're having a debate and then we're just going to state things as facts without any evidence to back them up. Um, I think the science is pretty, like the consensus of the science is pretty clear that climate change will be bad. but like you can you can decide to say that's not true. I think you would have to show some pretty conclusive evidence to say, why all the scientists have been wrong. But
But I don't dispute that there's been global
but I
warming.
think
That's not what I'm
if
disputing,
you
right?
ask those scientists, if you were to ask those scientists, do you think climate change will have significant negative effects for humanity and the environment, they would say, absolutely, yes, it will. Um, so you'd have to explain to me why they all think that, and you're right and they're wrong. But
Well, I think I've given
um,
my reasoning so far. As I said,
yeah,
the
but
warming thus
you've
far has been
said things like
concentrated in
the
cold,
hurricane
arid
has gone
regions.
down. Uh-huh.
I mean, you can look up the NASA temperature
I
data.
think we should
It's
just move on
on
to a
the.
topic that is less empirically based, because otherwise we're not going to be able to
Sure,
reach a
we can move on.
consensus
That's
in
fine.
any way.
I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the one who brought it up.
Um, well, yeah, because I thought it was pretty like consensus to begin with, pretty commonly
I
agreed
mean,
on by everyone.
I am not one for groupthink. I do not, simply because a lot of people believe something. I'm not one of those people that says, okay, I'm going to believe that too. That is just not how my mind works. I'm sorry.
Okay. Right. So that's one aspect of the issues with capitalism. The other issues has been um, the encouragement of third world exploitation, the the levels of an unnecessary poverty, and the one major issue that I find with capitalist societies is the atomization, whether that be the alienation from the environment, from the workers, from oneself, from the products that you produce. And actually, even though I don't consider myself a Marxist, Marx did talk about alienation in his earlier works, and I feel it's one of his most valuable contributions.
But I mean, if you want to talk
Um,
about poverty, I mean, the hardcore capitalist countries are the richest, and even the poorest people in, say, Canada, enjoy a very high standard of living. So I think that, I mean, poverty is the natural condition of man. I think capitalism has done more to alleviate poverty than any other system in history.
um, it has produced more than any other system, but you can't really compare it to any other system in recent history because they have all pretty much been capitalists.
Yeah, because it's the
So,
only system that works.
well, that's kind of circular reasoning. You're saying they're capitalists because it's the only one that works. Okay, but how do we know it's the only one that works? Because it's the only one that we've had.
Yeah, because
That's
people have
circular
tried other
reasoning.
systems and they've all failed.
Which other system have we tried in recent history?
I mean, people have tried a lot of different systems. There was fascism, there was state capitalism, or
Fascism, fascism can still be capitalist. Again, state capitalism is still capitalist. It's still part of capitalism.
yeah. I mean, that's your argument that this USR was capitalism. I mean, that's a
Like, if
stretch.
we want to look at capitalist countries, like the vast majority of countries in the world are capitalist,
Well,
and the
apparently
vast
all the
majority of
countries in the
countries
world are
are
capitalist, right?
nowhere near as wealthy as the likes of Canada and the US. There are many in the third world which are capitalist, and in fact probably have lower levels of taxation and regulation than North American countries. And yet there is destitution and poverty, which is rampant everywhere.
Yeah, because you have to
So,
do it the right way, right? You have to do it the way that.
yeah, if you're focusing only on um, the most developed countries and saying, okay, capitalism works. Okay, but what about all the other countries which are capitalist, in which there is huge numbers of people living in poverty, and there's a um, very high level of unnecessary destitution.
Well, I don't really accept that like Sudan or Zaire are like hotbeds of capitalism. Traditionally, capitalism has meant something like France or England or the USA.
What do you mean by traditional capitalism?
I mean, that's what when people have said capitalism, capitalist countries, that's what they've referred to, you know, historically.
I mean, why would those countries be more capitalist than a country like Sudan?
Because they had, I don't know, they had more capital. That's just how it was, how it's always been. Like nobody calls Sudan or
I
Zaire
thought
any.
you were against. I thought you were against groupthink. It seems that you're doing a bit of groupthink here.
No, I'm in favor of
Countries are
language, using
the same.
language the way that it's used commonly in order to communicate ideas.
Okay, but that's not useful in any way. Saying, "Oh yeah, all the countries that we like and they work, we're going to call those capitalist." Oh, and all the countries where capitalism fails, oh, we're not going to call those capitalist. They are capitalist. They're all capitalist. In some countries, there's been fortunate some circumstances. For example, their ability to colonize most of the world and extract their resources, which is a large part of the reason why North American countries and European countries are so wealthy. Um, and much of that, essentially colonialism, exists in another form today. We can talk about that, neocolonialism,
I don't
the
think
way
that's got
that
anything to
large
do with it.
corporations.
I don't think these countries are rich
You
because
don't
they
think
prey on other
colonialism.
countries. That's not. Look at how England became rich. It was through the factory system. It was through free market enterprise. It wasn't because they were preying on other countries.
It's massively because they were preying on other countries. I mean, they extracted, I believe there are like estimates on this that they've extracted something like 5 trillion worth from India,
Look
um,
Look at
colonized
countries like
countries.
Singapore and Hong
The
Kong.
top,
They embraced the market economy. They embraced the rule of law, and they didn't prey on anybody. But they're as rich as any developed nation.
Hong Kong is slightly different. I mean, I'm not an expert on the history of Hong Kong. I could tell you more about India, for example, where they purposely destroyed textile industries in India. At the time, India was the biggest exporter of textiles, but that competed against the interests of British manufacturers. So they went in there and they destroyed their textile manufacturing industries. In some places, they even cut off the hands of sewers and other textile workers in order to make London or other parts of the UK the main exporter of textiles. You have examples whereby they actively encouraged ethnic tensions within India in order to essentially divide and conquer, which in the long run impoverished India, worse state to govern itself. But in the meantime, it allowed greater freedom for the UK to extract a greater number of resources from those countries. I mean, ultimately, a large part of the wealth um, which North American countries and European countries have accrued comes from colonialism and also the slave trade.
No, it's mostly just from production, from domestic production.
Yeah, but who built up that domestic production? It,
Individuals that saved money and reinvested it in capital.
and why did all the other countries not do that? Do you think they're just dumb?
Dumb?
Do you think
No,
they're
but
just
they
like,
didn't have the
"Oh,
right. They didn't have the right political philosophy. It was the advent of liberalism that paved the way for industrial capitalism in England and then the United States as well as the Netherlands.
you
It's
genuinely believe the difference between successful and unsuccessful countries is just like people with better ideas at the top.
Oh, absolutely. I believe
Ideas that
that ideas ultimately are affect change in history. Absolutely.
It's an incredibly simplistic understanding of history and reductionist in terms of, I mean,
I mean, it's more accurate than saying it's the result of material conditions.
yeah, and ideas themselves are often a result of material condition, and they're a result of political structures and many other factors. I think you're playing into the sort of what do you call it? The uh, strong men theory idea of history. Is it called the strong men here theory? Anyway,
Yeah, you're
the
going into
idea that like, you people completely determine the course of history. I just don't think it's. I don't think history works that way.
Not the actions of
Um,
individuals, but the ideas, the philosophy of the time. That's why, in Europe, between the 14th and 16th century, there was the rise of the absolute state, and the economic philosophy of the time was mercantilism, which was a sort of post hoc rationalization for whatever the crown wanted. And then, as a reaction to that, you had the great liberal revolution. People like Bastiat and James Mill, John Locke, who championed the rights of individuals and private property and free markets.
I mean, there's an inherent contradiction in saying that liberalism created this wealth, and at the same time, at the time that supposedly this liberalism came about, was the height of the British Empire and colonialism and the extraction of resources from third world countries. I would not consider that to be particularly liberal. I would not consider that to adhere to the liberal philosophies.
Yeah, I don't defend the
Height
actions of the British Crown.
that's
I'm an
its house.
anarcho-capitalist. I hate governments. I think they're evil.
Right. But I think you also have to acknowledge that under capitalism, the heights of the ruling classes, the people who make the laws in government, are often the same people who are in control of business in that country. The two work hand in hand under capitalism.
That's
If
not
you
how I
have
see it.
too much concentration of power and wealth, then they will utilize the state as a tool for their own enrichment.
Yeah, I
Right?
mean
And then that's
can
a
be
problem.
true, but that's why we should get rid of the state. It's got nothing to do with the market economy.
Or alternatively, we put the workers in control of the economy. So then both the workers control the state and the economy.
I don't think it would work very well.
I don't think ANCAP societies would work at all. Personally,
But
I
I
mean,
mean, laissez-faire worked pretty well, and it's the next closest thing to ANCAP.
what? What? Sorry,
Laissez-faire.
laissez. Yeah, but there's a big difference between laissez-faire and ANCAP societies.
I mean, not
What's
that
the
much.
difference?
Let me just ask you a few questions of how an ANCAP society would work.
All right, hit me with
Let's
it.
say that there's a dispute between two people of who owns a piece of land.
Uh-huh.
Right? Say you say I own it, person B says they own it. How do you resolve that dispute?
Well, isn't there like some title to it?
I get my gun out. I go over to their property and say, "Hey, this is my land," and you're not. This isn't your land now, so fuck off.
And if I
Right.
have a
So
bigger gun, then I can
essentially we've reverted back to tribal societies where might makes right. Is that what we're saying?
goddamn right.
I mean, a man with his gun is a fine judge of character. Something like that.
Right. So the entire point of creating a state is so that we can mediate social relations between people.
But that's
so
not
that we
why the
can,
state was created.
uh,
That's
Oh,
the
regardless
social
of why
contract
it was
creation
created,
myth. The reality is the state was created when one tribe conquered another and needed a means of exacting tribute from the conquered tribe.
yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I
We
think
need
that is the reason for keeping the state, because it does mediate social relations. And if we remove the state under a complex capitalist society, all that would happen is that those with the most power and wealth would try and increase their power and wealth with essentially might makes right. You know, I have a bigger army, I have a bigger private army than yours, so therefore I will take your resources. You know, why on earth bother? Why the fuck would you bother with competition? Why would you bother trying to produce a better product if you can just take resources?
Because conquest is too expensive.
It's not.
It really
You know,
is.
like colonialism proved this fact. It was very profitable for those in power.
I mean, I question how
Otherwise, why?
profitable it
Otherwise,
was.
why did?
But let me answer
Why
your
would they do
question, okay?
colonialism?
Why?
Let me ask you this: why would they do colonialism if it wasn't profitable for those in power?
Maybe it was just fun.
It was just fun. People just did it for fun. Really?
too much, no trolling.
Or maybe they
it's just
thought it would be
LOL.
profitable. I really don't think it was that profitable.
Well, wait. So colonialism was very unprofitable for the countries that did it. It was very profitable for companies that, and for some people who got colonial companies, right? It was very profitable
That's what
for
I'm
those
saying.
people. The country didn't make a lot of money, but the country did get a lot of national prestige out of it. It got troops for their military when they fought wars. So the countries did benefit. They still lost money with the colony. They got benefits out of it. Some companies and some people prosper off
Look,
it.
it's like war.
The
Why do
important
countries go to
distinction is
war? It's not
really-
profitable, but they go to war anyway.
Most definitely profitable for those in power. It's not profitable.
It's profitable
for
for the
the
military
citizens.
industrial complex, but it's not profitable for the nation.
No, it's profitable for industries within that company, within that country. I mean, I already mentioned textile industries within London, which massively profited by going into India, extracting resources, and destroying the textile industries
Yeah.
within India.
But look at the Iraq
again,
war, right? Okay,
what they
you spend
decided
trillions
is
of
that-
dollars and you get nothing. It's not a profitable. It's profitable for Lockheed Martin. It's profitable for the merchants of death, but it's not profitable for the USA or for Great Britain. So countries can
But
do
it is
things that aren't
profitable
profitable for them.
for the companies. It is profitable for the companies that exist within those imperialist countries. Because ultimately, why would they do it otherwise? You know,
The country ultimately does profit frequently from the companies because the companies do contribute to the economy, and
essentially, the way that imperialism works, and this is the same today with the American military-industrial complex. The workers pay for the military with their taxes, and then the primary people who benefit from that imperialism are not the workers, but rather a few companies within society who have lobbied the government and who have the politicians in their back pocket. It's not a question of is it good economically for working people in those imperialist countries. It's a question of whether it benefits the people who are actually making the decisions. And again, this would be no different under an ANCAP society. All that would happen is that one corporation that has a private army would go into a territory, would take resources, would likely enslave people if they like to. I mean, why not? You know,
Let me answer that.
stopping you.
I'd like to answer that. This is the same question you asked before. Okay, why couldn't a company just conquer in ANCAP? Okay, so
Yep.
so what would happen right now if I tried to raise a private army and told them we're going to go conquer like a small town in the USA?
The FBI would come knocking on your door and prevent you from doing that.
I mean, would anybody sign up to be part of that?
No, because they would know that the FBI would also knock on their door.
Because it would mean certain death for them, right?
Well, not necessarily death, but
No, but
imprisonment.
you get your army of 500 people. You go and conquer some little town, and the FBI
Uh-huh.
and everybody's going to swarm in, and you're either going to go to prison for life or you're going to die, right?
Sure. What
So
is your
that's
argument
exactly
here?
what would happen in an ANCAP society. You still have police. So all the police agencies would get together and they'd swarm on you. So it would be insanely expensive to hire anybody to go and try to do that because you'd have to pay them, $500 million or something. Nobody's going to voluntarily go die or go to life in prison.
Who owns the police?
The police are private. They're private companies.
Right. And so why would the people who own those police regulate themselves?
I don't understand the question.
Let's say that you own the police. Why
Okay.
the fuck would you care to act in moral ways?
No, because
Is there anything stopping you from using that police to take other people or take other resources?
because your company is offering a service to the community, the policing service, right? That's how you get your income.
No. Under a capitalist society, they're not doing it for the good of the community or anything else. They're doing it for profit.
They're yeah, but
And
they're offering a service to their customers, like a private security firm.
Do you think the average person can afford private security? No, they're
Why
trying
not?
to cover they're trying to cover their basic living expenses. The average person in the US can't pay for like $200 emergency. These people are not going to be paying high, levels towards a private army.
Yeah, but it's
to
not like an
support them.
insurance
Do you know
basis. It's
who
like
does-
$50 a
you know
month,
who does have a lot-
insurance
Hold on.
premium.
You know who does have a lot of disposable income? Rich people. They are the ones who will be owning these private armies because they are the ones who can afford it.
No, you can just get like a $50 a month subscription or whatever to your police services. It's based on an insurance model.
Okay, but
You're not going to need police all that often.
let's say the police are primarily because let's say like everyone pays on average 10% of their income towards the private police.
No, that's
okay?
that seems really high.
Okay, say 1%.
Yeah,
right?
1%. Well,
In
I
this
mean,
society,
it wouldn't be
if
like
a
proportional to
natural
their income. They would all pay like $100 or whatever.
with a regular distribution of income and wealth inequality, that would mean that the vast majority of the funding would come from the top 10% of earners. I mean, for example, in the US, I know there's
No, it would
progressive
mostly come from
taxation and such.
the
vast
medium and low
majority
income
of
people
comes
because there's a lot
from
more
earners.
of them.
Why? Because earners have the most disposable income. Okay, so even if we assumed everyone was putting an equal proportion of their income into the police would get far more funding from rich people than they would from poor people. And therefore, they would be far more beholden to the interests of rich people than they would be beholden to the interests of poor people. Do you not see the kind of problems that would arise if you have a police force, a private police force, whose customers are primarily rich people and who are supposed to enforce laws which benefit everyone, not just the rich?
But it's like an insurance premium. You wouldn't pay 1% of your income. You'd pay a fixed amount, like $100, $50. So there's a lot more medium and medium low income people than there are rich people.
Dude,
Like companies
most
don't charge you
people
based
are
on what your income is. They charge based on a service. When you buy groceries in the store, they're not like, all right, that'll be 0.5% of your gross income, please.
Why would a wealthy person pay for the same service as a poor person? That makes
Okay,
no sense.
they
Like,
might get the
there's
deluxe
no
package
other
that has like a faster response
there's no
time.
other commodity where that is the case. If you have more money, then you're gonna pay for a more premium service.
Yeah, I agree
So
with that.
you're gonna get, yeah, okay. So if you have a more premium service, what does that mean?
I mean, they might
It
even
means
have
that those have more money, have greater capacity to use the police for their own interests.
but that's not how it works. Like, you
It is how it works. That's just how any commodity. What do you mean?
they're offering a service, a protection service to the public. It's not like you're going to go do my bidding. They're not going to go commit some crime for the rich guy because it wouldn't be worth it.
Yes, but why are they offering that service? It's not because they have the interests of the community at heart. It's because they're doing it for a profit.
Yeah, they
And
want
if
to make
most of their money, if they make more money of rich people paying a premium, then why on earth would they not prioritize wealthier customers and their interests?
Yeah, but that premium just means they're offering sort of a more deluxe package of security to the
What does
rich
that
person.
mean in terms of police? What
Maybe-
would that
maybe-
mean in terms of the police?
Faster response time, something like that. It still doesn't change the fundamental nature of.
Okay, first of all, are you okay with wealthier people essentially getting the police to turn up quicker because they're paying more?
Yes,
I mean, to
I have
me,
no
that
problem
is
with that.
morally indefensible. But even if we put that to aside, what it means is if we look at the revenue from this police service, this company that is trying to make profits, it's going to get a far greater of the share of its revenue from wealthy customers, and therefore it will adapt its policies in order to most benefit those customers that it most wants to keep. Okay?
Like it could be true
It
that
also
some
means
firms
people have
cater to
different-
elite customers, but there's a lot
could even
more
have
of
different-
medium income and poor people, like customers, available than there are rich guys. So there's going to be.
Let me ask you, if you were a really wealthy person, why would you pay into a company that indirectly provides security? If you have the money, why not hire the security yourself?
Well, it's a lot cheaper
It would be cheaper.
to have an insurance situation where you only call upon it when you need it.
Oh,
You don't need.
Not if you have the money, not if you have the capital up front. It would be cheaper to simply have the security.
I mean, if you're like a billionaire, urban billionaire, you could have some bodyguards. They already do that.
Yeah. Okay, so if you have a billionaire with their own private army, what's to stop them from essentially going in and taking others' resources?
Like I literally already answered this. It would be extremely expensive because you're paying them to go to certain death. So that you'd have to pay them, you couldn't pay them enough. They wouldn't do it. They would just say no.
I'm afraid I have to stop the debate because
Okay.
I've got family stuff to deal with.
All right, well thank you very much for
but-
your time, and maybe we'll pick it up again
No
sometime.
worries.
Take care.
Sure.